Hello and welcome to another edition of Chill with Kaiju Kim. I'm Kaiju Kim. Hope you're all doing well on this lovely afternoon, evening, whatever time it is for you. We like to have fun here on this channel, but it's good to keep a sharp mind and learn new things here and there. Tonight, I want to learn more about Japanese cinema, Japanese science fiction. I want to know, what's going on between in the minds of the people behind the films and what films I've been missing out on, all that fun stuff. And here to help me out with that tonight is a film journalist, and he is also I can't speak tonight, ladies and gentlemen. He's a co-organizer of an online convention called Kaiju Masterclass, and he's also the author of Ruan Lingyu, Her Life and Career. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Patrick Galvan.
Hi, Kim. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining me. How are you tonight?
I'm doing very good. How about yourself?
I've been okay. Been okay. Doing good. How's that cough?
It's hopefully going away. I was telling Kim this before the show. I am currently on the tail end of a 2-week-long coughing spree, and it's so if I hack a little bit during the stream, please forgive me. So if my mic mutes at a certain point, that's the reason why. But hopefully, it won't be a huge problem because we are fortunately at the tail end of it, I think. So.
All right, but it's not COVID. You told me so.
It's not COVID. We're good. Well, this is an online interview anyway, so it wouldn't be a problem either way. So
yeah, either way. You never know. Technology, they can just cough and then your germs will transfer to me through the microphone. I don't know.
Yeah, well, Skynet could be on its way, so who knows?
Yeah. All right. So why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself, what you do?
Sure. Well, as Kim said, I am Patrick Galvan. I am a film journalist. I have written for such venues as TohoKingdom.com, Sci-Fi Wire, which is the official news site for the Sci-Fi Channel. I've written for a British online magazine called ourculture.org. I've written for John Lee May's Lost Films fanzine. And I am basically a guy who is, not entirely, but kind of made my focus Asian cinema, namely films from Japan, which began with my affinity for Kaiju Eiga, and I've been a fan of Kaiju Eiga since I first saw Godzilla 2000 in the theater when it first came out stateside, and that evolved into interest in Kaiju, which inevitably led into interest in Japanese film in general. Namely, when I found out that Honda Ishiro, who, as we all know, was the main director of the original Godzilla series, was best friends with a guy named Kurosawa Akira, who was, as I was reading at the time, renowned as one of the greatest directors who ever lived. I thought, well, that sounds interesting, and so I started watching Kurosawa films, and his reputation was, more than well deserved, and that led to me discovering other directors and filmmakers and genres, and it's just kind of like led to one thing after another. And in 2014, around the time that the Gareth Edwards Godzilla was on its way to theaters, that kind of, there was Godzilla discussions and media all over the place, and that kind of rejuvenated my interest in Kaiju and writing about it. And so in 2014, I started writing about the genre, and I've just basically been at it ever since, along with writing about other films from Asia. And as you mentioned, and I won't go into this too much details, we'll talk about it later, but in 2020, I was asked to join the organization team for the online convention Kaiju Masterclass, which has run twice, once in 2020 and once in 2021. And that's, in a nutshell, who I am and what I do.
All right, great. We'll be getting into more details about your work and all the fun stuff you got going on in just a moment. Let's just say real quick hello to the people in the chat. We got Warrior King Forever. Hello, hello. And Kasaibo F29. Good to see you. Thanks for stopping by. Oh, and look, Doomzilla just popped in. Hello, sir.
Hello. Doomzilla is a huge supporter of Kaiju Masterclass, and really appreciate your support, man. So thank you always for your support for the convention as well as for the things everybody else in the team does as well.
Yes, I enjoyed Kaiju Masterclass as well. So thank you, and to everyone else involved in that for putting that together. It was
Thank
very
you.
good. Very awesome. All right. So before we get rolling, I like to ask my guests 3 questions. How did you get into Godzilla? What's your favorite Godzilla film? And what's your favorite non Godzilla kaiju film?
Okay, well, question one. I kind of have a somewhat longer route in terms of how I got into this stuff. I mentioned Godzilla 2000 earlier, but how I came to see that film was kind of an interesting story. Growing up, I'd heard the name Godzilla, but I had assumed that it was a pop culture name like the Boogeyman, not something attached to any kind of multimedia franchise. And mainly because my parents, family, friends, none of them were even remotely interested in this kind of thing, so I had no exposure to it as a result. And then when the TriStar Godzilla came out in 1998, I assumed that Hollywood just took that generic pop culture name, or what I thought was a generic pop culture name, and made a film out of it. And that's all I ever thought about it. And then 2 years later, Godzilla 2000 comes out, or rather, I heard it was coming out from a friend, and I saw no trailers for it, knew nothing about it. I was like, oh, they made a sequel to the TriStar Godzilla. That's what I thought it was going to be. Was a sequel was going to be Matthew Broderick fighting the giant iguana all over again. That's what I thought I was getting into. That's what my parents thought we were getting into when we went to go to the theater to go see Godzilla 2000. And you can imagine my surprise, 30 seconds in, when I discovered, oh, this is a Japanese-made production, dubbed in English. And then you can imagine my surprise later when Godzilla turned up on screen, and I was like, well, this Godzilla is, not as quote unquote realistic as the Matthew Broderick Godzilla, but I kind of like him more. He's got a very Charles R. Knight, old fashioned dinosaur design, stands upright, tail dragging and such. He breathes fire, which is cool. He fights other monsters. And when the military shoots him with missiles, he just walks right through it and keeps going on destroying the city. And I thought, hey, this Godzilla is not realistic, but he's more interesting, I thought. But even then, at the time with Godzilla 2000, I thought, okay, Japan just did their own spin on what Hollywood had already done. That's what I thought it was at that point. Then later that same year, in 2000, I caught a double feature of Godzilla versus King Ghidorah and Godzilla versus Moth in 1992 on the Sci-Fi Channel. And when I discovered those two things were made in the early 90s, and I realized they came before the TriStar Godzilla and Godzilla 2000, that's when I realized that there was actually that the Godzilla franchise was actually it was a franchise. It did not begin with the Matthew Broderick film. It began with filmmakers in Japan going back decades before the films that I saw in the theater. And that's basically how it just snowballed from there. As the years went on between then and Final Wars coming out, I would aggressively hunt down every film I could see. And by the time Final Wars came out, I think I'd basically caught up with all the Heisei and Showa films. And that's basically how I got into this genre.
Awesome. And what's your favorite Godzilla movie?
My favorite Godzilla movie, that's also an interesting question, because if you'd asked me that question a couple of years ago, I would have had a definitive answer for you. Nowadays, my answer kind of depends on what one I recently saw and what I'm currently thinking about. So it's kind of hard for me to pick one over all the others. If that makes sense, because there's lots of Godzilla films that are very good and lots of ones that are good in their own unique, distinctive ways. But I'll tell you what I'm currently thinking about, and I'm not saying this just because I'm on your show, but what I'm currently thinking about is Godzilla 2000 again, because I actually really do like that one. Not just because it was my first Godzilla film, but because I just think it's a very interesting looking film. It's a very atmospheric film. It's got a unique tone and feel to it. And I really like, and this is what really stuck with me also since I first saw that movie, was I like the sense of reverence and majesty and mystery about Godzilla in that film. So I don't know if it's my definitive favorite, but it's one that I'm currently thinking about a lot. And it's a film that I revisit, quite frequently. So I know it's kind of like a sideways way of answering your question, but for the moment, I'll say Godzilla 2000.
Excellent choice. How about your favorite non-Godzilla kaiju film?
I'll say Rodan for the meantime.
All right.
Rodan's a very interesting film. I like the mix of the Japanese them style film that as the way it opens, and then how it kind of segues into a totally different kind of movie after that. I like the amnesia subplot that helps solve the big mystery of what is this big thing destroying things around the world. That's very atmospheric. It's got a beautiful score by Akira Ifukube. That's a film that I like very much.
Another excellent choice. Alrighty. So before we get into our main topic, let's talk about that book of yours that just came out at the beginning of this month.
Yep. As Kim mentioned, I recently published a book called Ruan Ling Yu, Her Life and Career. And also, as I mentioned, I am a journalist who specializes in Asian movies in general. When I'm not writing about Japanese films, I'm usually writing about films from early China. And one of my favorite Chinese film performers, and one of my favorite film performers in general, is a Chinese actress from who was active during the 20s and the 30s, named Ruan Ling Yu. She was active in Shanghai during that time. She only made silent films. The vast majority of her films are now unfortunately lost, due to a variety of factors that negatively. I mean, silent movies in general have been dealt a huge loss over over the last couple of decades. But the destruction of silent films in Asia, in particular, is very bad, namely because of World War II. And the destruction that befell a lot of cities during World War II, including Shanghai, where she was active and where prints of her films were mainly stored. But anyhow, I've been a big fan of hers for a number of years, and in 2018, was when I first saw one of her movies. I was enamored immediately, and as I write in the introduction of the book, I was when I started to read up about her, I kind of had this starstruck mentality of this woman had talent, she had fame, she had beauty, she had success, and yet she was so unhappy with her life that she committed suicide when she was only 24 years old. And I wanted to know, this stems from a starstruck fan mentality where you forget briefly that celebrities are only human themselves. And I wanted to know, why that was. And I started doing research about her over the next couple of years, with no ambitions of doing anything grand scale with it. It was just merely to satisfy my own personal curiosity about her life and people she worked with and about her industry. And in 2021, I had accumulated a large amount of information about her, and it just kind of dawned on me, it's kind of wasteful, I think, to just keep holding on to all these findings that I've uncovered, because I'd found testimonies from filmmakers who worked with her. I'd uncovered a lot of plot synopses for her lost movies. I had a lot of information about the general course of her life and the events that pushed her to take her own life when she was only 24 years old. And it just seemed wasteful to keep holding on to those findings, just let them sit there. And so I decided, well, I've got extra time now, obviously, because of the pandemic. So why don't I compile what I've learned into a document with the detail and structure of a book? And after a process of about 9 months of constantly writing and rewriting, the book was finished, and here we are.
Here we are. Congratulations on the release of your book, by the way. I bet a lot of time and dedication went into this. Can you walk us through the process of getting this book published?
Well, I decided to release it on Amazon.com because, it was basically just as simple as that. Amazon has a platform called KDP, Kindle Direct Publishing, where you can publish content on your own, and that's the venue that I chose to go for with this book. So I just did it through there, and I did that so I could also, for a couple of reasons. One of them was to dictate the price of the book. I wanted it to be relatively affordable for people. So it's $16, and it's a pretty meager sized book. It's not like War and Peace size, but it's substantial. And so that's there's not really like a big complex story behind how I got it published. I just took advantage of a platform that already exists, and that's how it happened.
All right, cool. So once again, ladies and gentlemen, you can buy this book by following the link down below in the description if you're interested. And once again, congratulations on getting that released.
Thank you.
So, you seem to be very passionate about film in general, which is awesome. Your passion for Japanese cinema, Kaiju Eiga in particular, is one of the reasons I asked you to come on to this show. So, as we mentioned earlier, you were one of the fantastic people behind Kaiju Masterclass.
Mhm.
Can you go into a little more detail on how that came to be?
Now that's a longer, more fascinating story, Kaiju Masterclass. So in the early months of 2020, when the pandemic was really starting to take off, and conventions around the nation were shutting down. G Fest, it had not been officially announced that G Fest was going to be canceled for that year, but it was becoming more obvious and apparent and really reasonable to infer that it probably was going to be canceled that year. And around this time, our mutual friend, Matt Burkett of Monstrosities Tokusatsu Vlog, he made a video that was basically asking the question of, like, who are the next generation of kaiju experts? Who are they and why are they not getting, like, tons of exposure? So he made a YouTube video about that, and his video was picked up by another friend of the conventions, Tom Gwelly, who posted it on his Facebook page, and he looped a bunch of us into it. And in the in the comments of that Facebook thread, there started a discussion. Initially, as kind of a joke, it was basically between Steve Rifle and Eric Hominick. Steve Rifle needs no introduction, but he was the author. He's the author of Japan's Favorite Monster, the great book about the Godzilla franchise. He co-authored the biography on Ishiro Honda, a life and film from Godzilla to Kurosawa, which came out a few years ago. With co-authored that with Ed Gachichesky. He's the voice behind many of the classic media, audio commentaries that a lot of us grew up and loved. And Eric Hominick is the webmaster and the official English language biographer of Akira Ifukube. He's been working with the Ifukube family for many, many years in compiling the most authoritative and comprehensive document and book about it's not a book yet, but biography about the great composer whose music we all love. But anyhow, so those two were having a discussion in the comments, and it was kind of like, with all due respect to G Fest, would it be nice if there was another convention that was really focused on the information, focusing on the people who made the films, the making of the movies themselves, and it was about that. Toys are great, merchandise is great, autographs are great, but wouldn't it be nice if there was a convention that focused just on learning about the films that we love? And it started out as kind of a joke, I think. But little did I know, behind the scenes, Steve and Eric were having a more serious conversation about doing an actual convention about that, with that kind of emphasis. And so a couple of days later, or maybe even the next day, I think, I got looped into a conversation along with Kyle Bird, who is one of the two co-hosts of the podcast Kaiju Transmissions. And we started talking, like, hey, what if we actually tried to put on an online Godzilla convention, try to get whatever guests we could get from Japan, host it virtually, so that way we could interview people without them having to fly over to America, and just see what we can pull off. And we can also gather, like, historians and people who have dabbled in this genre, and just see what we can pull off. And so over the next over the next couple of months, we steadily amassed a larger team of people, including John DeSantis, Matt Parmley, Kyle Gilmore, and excuse me, and we we started putting out requests to people in Japan and America who had worked in the genre, with the hope that we get at least maybe one or two people who would say yes, and maybe fill out the rest of the convention, with just us trying to be informative and whatnot. And much to our delight and surprise, certainly our surprise, almost everybody we reached out to said yes. And we got people like Kaneko Shusuke, Higuchi Shinji, Wakasa Shinichi. We got David Arnold, the composer of Godzilla 98. We got Tab Murphy, who wrote the treatment for the unmade big screen sequel to the TriStar Godzilla. We got Oshima Michiru, who did the scores for Megagiras and the Kiryu duology. We had a pretty surprisingly Bear McCreary also on the music theme, who did Godzilla King of the Monsters. We got him. we had a pretty large, very stacked group of guests, and the convention was, and I think I can speak for the entire team when I say this, it was everything that I thought it was going to be and hoped it would be, and a lot more than that. And so in 2021, we decided to do another convention. Which I should also mention the convention is fully archived on our YouTube channel, Kaiju Masterclass, 100% free to watch. You can watch all the videos there. And with Kaiju Masterclass 2, we decided to step up the game a little bit. And we got another huge roster of great people, including Tom Kitagawa, the suit actor from the Millennium series, and also some big names that we never thought we'd ever get, like Reijiro Karoku, who did the score for Godzilla 1984, one of the most beloved scores in the entire franchise, and a composer who, to the best of our knowledge, had never been interviewed by an English language platform about his score in history. And so he was kind of like, a long shot, but we're like, hey, let's just see if we can get him. And much to our delight, he said yes. I was very enthusiastic about it. And we also got Kitamura Ryuhei, made Godzilla Final Wars and Versus and Azumi and a lot of other beloved action films of recent years. And I think I also speak for the team when I say Kaiju Masterclass 2 was, a step above the previous one. And it's a convention that we're all very, very proud of. And there's presently no confirmation or announcements or press about a third convention. But we did recently, about a month or so ago, upload an interview with Linda Miller, who was the star of King Kong Escapes. So even though there's not a third convention confirmed as of yet, the project is not exactly dead, so to speak. And so I think I'll just diplomatically say this: just keep your eye out on our YouTube channel and on our social media, because there could be some exciting things happening, sometime in the future.
Ooh, I certainly hope so. I was able to watch a good chunk of Kaiju Masterclass last year, and I think it's safe to say that a lot of people, myself included, got stuff out of it, got something out of it. And our friend Doomzilla says Kaiju Masterclass is perfect in a time where the pandemic is at its darkest and bleakest time, and it really brought so many Kaiju fans together for this amazing event. And I thank you for this. Yes.
Yep, thank you, Doomzilla. We really appreciate it.
Yes. So hopefully we'll see something again this November.
Yeah, maybe next year we'll see.
Maybe we'll see.
Neither confirm nor deny.
Okay, I'll strangle it out of you later. No. All right, so let's get into our main topic, which is Japanese science fiction. So we already talked about Godzilla and Rodan a little bit. So what are some more of your favorite films of that genre?
Matango, is one of my favorites. I think that's that and the first Mothra are my favorite Honda films that don't have Godzilla in them. Matango, I think, is a film which really plays to Honda's strengths, in that it's very actor oriented, very claustrophobic, very atmospheric. It doesn't rely so much upon the action sequences, like the physical person combat action sequences, which Honda was not the best director, I think. I think Matango is a film that plays more to what he's good at, and it has a lot of food for thought as a film made during the during a time of great cultural change in Japan in the early 1960s. And Mothra is just a very beautiful, fantastic, wonderful, visually striking, imaginative fantasy film with a lot of food for thought as well. Those two movies, I just absolutely love them. And Mothra is the curious one, because as a kid, I was kind of indifferent to it for reasons that I can't really explain. But upon seeing that film again in college, I was, just absolutely enamored with it. And it's, I've watched it many times in the years since then. And it's just a film that I love more each time I see it. And I find new things to appreciate about it the more I see it. Other films, I really, for Kaiju Masterclass 1, I was the host for a panel about the director Jun Fukuda, who made Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster, Son of Godzilla, Mechagodzilla, Gigan, Megalon. He also made films like The War in Space, Secret of the Telegion. I'm a big admirer of Jun Fukuda, and I've always found it kind of unfortunate that he's been kind of, backhanded compared to Honda. not given nearly as much attention as Honda, kind of thought of as a second or third tier director. I personally really like his movies. He made films of a very different kind of vein than Honda. He specialized in action, comedy, straightforward entertainment films. And in my honest opinion, I think he was exceptionally good at that. Son of Godzilla is also a film that I really like, and that's a movie that I think there's no fat to trim. It's a story that's constantly moving forward. Everything in every scene in it is interesting. It's always building towards another interesting thing in the next sequence. So that's a director and a film that also ranks very highly for me. I also, of course, love Kaneko's Gamera films from the '90s. GMK is also a favorite of mine. Godzilla 2000, as we mentioned. Both of the '80s Godzillas also. I've kind of gone back and forth on the Heisei series in general over the years. Nowadays, I've circled around to liking them again. But the two '80s films, Return of Godzilla and Biollante, I think are like the pinnacle of that era, because they were really working from like a clean slate, creativity wise, dealing with big issues like the Cold War and bioengineering technology. Those two films had very large budgets, which were very evident all the way through them. Not just in terms of like the special effects, but also the production design, like these big, huge, immensely detailed sets for the human scenes as well. I love this shot in Godzilla '84 where we first see the command center where all the bureaucrats are at, and it starts off here on these guys at a console, and then swings over this window. There's a whole other room in the next through that window, and wow, this is a film in which Toho realized they had a large budget and said, okay, let's show it off. And Biollante was the exact same thing. So those two films also, I've come around to liking the films that came after again, but those two films I think hit the peak for the Heisei series because they were really resourceful and interesting and dealt with big topics and big issues. Aside from that, as far as the Showa Gamera films go, I like Baragon and Gauss a lot. Those are and I also really like Giron. Giron's my big guilty pleasure movie. Whenever I want to watch a film that is just completely ridiculous and very silly and absurd, that's one of my go-to entries, and I'm always utterly delighted every time I watch it. I always have a total blast, from frame one all the way to the end of it, regardless of how ridiculous and goofy and silly it is.
I mean, if you've seen my show, I like the ridiculous and goofy movies. But,
Yeah.
You seem to lean more towards, films that have a message and a story behind them that, that are a little more grounded. Is that what you would say that's what you look for in a film of this genre?
Well, what I really look for is a film that is very successful in whatever it's trying to be. I think in general, yeah, I might lean a little bit more towards films that have something to say, just because I think that's one of the values of movies, is they can reflect things about the world. But, I'm perfectly capable of enjoying a film that has very little to say or nothing to say, but it's just straightforward entertainment. Jun Fukuda's films, for example. Fukuda's films, yeah, some of them do have themes and ideas, but they're usually just lip service. Global hunger in Son of Godzilla, or pollution becoming a problem in Gaigan. Yeah, the theme's there, but it's not the core focus of the movie. They're just entertainment films, but they're very well made on their own level. So yeah, maybe I lean a little bit more towards the serious films in general, but I'm more than capable of enjoying a ridiculous entertainment film that knows what it is, knows how to achieve what it's trying to do, and just scores all the high marks along the way. And I'm perfectly capable, and I'm perfectly willing to admit when one of those kind of films tops a more ambitious film that doesn't reach its ideas. Hopefully I don't alienate your audience when I say this, but a Honda film that I don't particularly like is Goreth. The big move the Earth out of the way movie by putting rockets on the North and South Pole film. Have you seen Goreth?
That's on my never-ending list of things I still need to see.
Okay, well, Honda thought of it as one of his more favorite films he made. I don't particularly admire it. Mainly not because I don't think it's ambitious. I just don't think that it scores doesn't succeed at what it's trying to do. I think for it doesn't like its execution does not match its ambition. And I'll flat out say I would much rather watch Son of Godzilla, which has much lower aspirations but hits its target much more efficiently. So kind of a long-winded way of answering your question, but yeah, I look for a film that knows that succeeds at what it's trying to do. Even though in my heart I may slightly prefer films that have something to say and are a little more serious.
Yeah. Like I said, I'm the complete opposite. Like I tend to lean more towards the goofy films, but I can enjoy the more serious and grounded films. But I think you put it perfectly. Like as long as the film is, successful at what it's trying to do, then that's what makes it a good film. That's what makes it enjoyable. So yes, I definitely agree with you there. And real quick, I just want to say hi to Michael Hamilton. Yes,
Hi,
please.
Michael.
Thanks for stopping by, Michael. All right. So we mentioned earlier that you've done articles for Sci-Fi, Toho, Kingdom, and other websites. So I'm curious to know, what are some of the most fascinating things you've learned about Japanese cinema as you were writing these articles?
Oh boy, where to begin?
We've got time. We've got plenty of time.
No, here's something I find fascinating, and I've talked about this on and off for the years, and I've alluded to this in a lot of my articles. I haven't made this a focus of an article yet. But what I find fascinating about Godzilla and the Godzilla franchise is how it all kind of fits into the scope of the Japanese film industry. In the 1950s, when this stuff really took off, the film industry in Japan was at its all-time peak. 1958, the year that Honda made H-Man and Varan, that was the year that was the absolute undisputed pinnacle for attendance for Japanese films in history. Over 1 billion people in Japan went to go see Japanese films in that year. And there's been no year since then that has even come close. And especially not in the modern years. And so in the 1950s, the studios were in very good shape. They had, lots of money to shove into these films, as well as other films like, Kurosawa's Seven Samurai, which went over budget and whose schedule went ridiculously much longer than it was originally slated to be. But the studios could afford to put a lot of expense into these films because, they had the money, the resources, and the audiences were there to support that kind of an industry. In the late 1950s and up through the 1960s, things start to go downhill a little bit economically. The television stuff that Honda was making fun of in King Kong versus Godzilla, well, there's a lot of truth to that. There were a lot of television shows that were very low quality, very low intellectual quality. In fact, there was a Japanese historian named Oya Soichi who begged the question, is television turning Japan into a nation of 100 million idiots? And that's the kind of thing that Honda was making fun of in King Kong versus Godzilla. And there's a lot of truth to that. Television was expanding. A lot of it was very frivolous and low quality, but it was pulling away the audiences for movies. And as a result, the attendance for Japanese films, starts to go downhill. For that reason and for other reasons. There are also economic reasons and other things. And well, I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. For that reason and for economic reasons and other factors, these studios in Japan, including Toho, were starting to downsize, starting to restructure themselves, starting to rent out their studios to subsidies for filming TV and such. And as a result, you had these films first Godzilla film had an attendance of 9 point something million people or something like that. King Kong versus Godzilla had 11.2 million people. And by the time we get to Son of Godzilla, just 5 years later, it's down to 2 point something million. So, and it wasn't just, and that was true not only of science fiction, it was also true of the film industry in general. And there were things samurai films were starting to be reimagined as television shows. And what shall we call shomingeki, home dramas, movies about ordinary everyday life, which were mainly catered towards women, housewives, office ladies, single women, were migrating to TV as well. And at this point, in the 60s, the predominant demographic going to movies is men, and that's why you have a lot of gangster films and yakuza films rising to fill the void in the 60s. And as for kaiju stuff, like audiences are now more fascinated by Hollywood films and James Bond and things like that. And yeah, and so the industry has kind of it's ebbed and flowed since then, but it's never reached the same peak that it was in the 1950s when this stuff kind of came about. And so even though, and so when you get to like the Heisei era, the films, we're in now we're in the time of like the bubble economy in the 1980s, and the studio is in, say, shall we say, better shape than it was in the 70s, perhaps, but still not the exact same thing. And that was also reflected in the people who worked on these movies. Like, Honda and Jun Fukuda, they came from a background that was strikingly different from, say, Okawara Takao or Yamashita Kensho, who were involved in the Heisei films, the later Heisei films. Yamashita made Space Godzilla, Okawara made Mothra, Mechagodzilla, Destroya, and also Godzilla 2000 eventually. And those two guys' background was like very different from Honda and Fukuda's. When Honda and Fukuda got started at Toho, they started off as ADs, assistant directors, and this was a time when ADs at Toho were being actively groomed to become directors. They didn't want you just to be a career AD. They wanted you to learn your craft, become proficient at it, be actively trained in it, so you could one day become a really qualified filmmaker and ideally take on apprentices of your own. Now, that kind of thing started to go away by the time Honda and Fukuda became directors. But what I'm getting at is that in their time, they got a lot of rigorous training from the people above them, and they were actively taught how to make movies. Unfortunately, that kind of thing sort of goes away as the studios downsize. And when we get to the Heisei era, there's no longer that kind of system to nurture and develop talent. Like, for example, Okawara, for example, he was not actively trained to become a filmmaker. He was an AD for like 20 some years, but he wasn't being actively groomed to become a filmmaker. And as a result, to get his foot in the directing door, he had to like kind of go work around the system, because he would, come up with scripts and ideas, and the front office would say, okay, good, nice work, and then just ignore him and go off to working with somebody who's already established. And so he had to submit a script to a script contest, and was fortunate that it won, like, I think it was second place. I think it was like the Keto Awards. It won second place, and that got him the window to make his first movie, which was a ESP fantasy film called Riko the Psyche Resurrected. And that film did not do very good box office, but it was thought of as a well-made piece of entertainment, which got him the window to make Godzilla vs. Mothra in 1992. But right there, but the point I'm getting at is that he came from a very different kind of background than, say, Honda and Fukuda, where ADs were being trained, developed, and nurtured to become professional filmmakers. And so that, I think, is kind of fascinating as well. And what I'm really interested in with today's Godzilla films is that Toho, which nowadays gets a lot of its money from real estate and things like that, things that are not really Godzilla related or film related, Toho nowadays outsources director talent for the Godzilla franchise, hiring people who are not on the Toho payroll, like Anno and the guys who worked on the anime trilogy, or Takahashi, who made Singular Point. These guys were not Toho ADs who got a window to make a new film. So it's a very different kind of system now than it was even 30 years ago, which was different from how it was 30 years before that, when the franchise was first beginning. So again, very long-winded way of answering your question, but that's something that's really fascinated me over the years, is just how the Godzilla franchise has reflected the ebb and flow nature of the film industry in Japan. Because these movies are a product of their times and their situations, and that, I think, is very fascinating. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you. It's okay. I like long-winded answers on this show, because I like my guests do all the talking, because I can't talk tonight, apparently. Oh, good Lord. So How has being a film journalist changed the way you feel not only Japanese cinema, but cinema in general?
It's a marked difference just because my approach with movies and being a film journalist is I've tried in general to avoid this is my opinion, this is why I think that way. Because opinions are cheap. I mean, everybody's got one, and there's opinions all over the internet. I mean, I do reviews and I do try to put analyses in my works, but at the same time, I try to focus more on the historical aspect and researching, like, the times in which these films were made, which involves doing research about things like, what was going on politically in Japan or culturally in Japan or economically in Japan or all of the above, as is the case in most instances. Figuring out how all of these things influence the studios and the filmmakers and the stories that are being told in the movies. So it's a lot of heavy lifting, and it takes a lot of work to write these things to a point where I'm personally satisfied with it. And it really has opened my eyes to a lot of things I didn't know about film history and about world history. So my approach has been to just basically educate myself on things about the movies and about things that are aside from the movies but still influence them. So and what I just talked about with the Toho and the film industry and the Godzilla franchise, that's like just one example of things that I've learned over the years. So
Awesome. Awesome. So, what films are on your watch list? Like, what haven't you seen yet? I know you've seen like a ton more films than I have, and I'll probably never catch up with you. But what haven't you seen yet? Is anything?
as far as like Kaiju Eiga or Japanese film in general or
Just in general, like I guess mostly Kaiju Eiga.
Kaiju Eiga, okay. Uh, something that I haven't seen that I probably should see. Well, can I cheat and say Shin Ultraman just because it's not available yet?
I mean, I guess that counts.
I'm trying to think if there's anything that I haven't. Oh, actually, no. I'll say this. I have not seen, even though I've been told I need to see them. I have not seen Zyram and its sequel, which I believe are from a guy named Amamiya Kaita. I'm told they're wonderful, but I have not had the chance to watch them yet. So I don't know. I don't know a whole lot about them, but everybody I talk to says they're great and they're wonderful. They're from the 1990s, I think. So those are on my to watch. Should have seen them, haven't seen them yet, but will eventually see them. That's basically that's a probably a more accurate answer to your question, I think, because yeah, Shin Ultraman's not here yet, so I can't have seen it.
Yeah,
So.
can't really. I don't think anyone here has seen it. Uh, I kind of want to see it. I'm not huge on Ultraman, but I'm mildly curious to see
Yeah,
what they did
yeah,
with it.
I'm the same way. Ultraman. I didn't really even start trying to expose myself to it until I was like in my 20s, and when I started to watch it, I was kind of like, again, I hope I don't alienate your audience, but I kind of watching the show as an adult, I was kind of thinking to myself, well, this must be how my parents felt when I forced them to watch Godzilla movies with me as a kid. So, it's not bad. It's just like I think it's something like the younger you see it, the better. But with Shin Ultraman, I am kind of interested in seeing it just because of Ano and Higuchi. Um, Not a huge fan of Shin Godzilla, but these two guys certainly have a lot of talent between them. And I remain hopeful they could do something together that I would really like. So, however, and also at the risk of backhanding the film, it's from what I'm reading, it sounds kind of like the movie is more of a 2-hour fan film for people who like Ultraman. So I'm not so sure how that's going to resonate with me. But hey, like we talked about earlier, it's not what it is; it's how it goes about trying to do what it's trying to do. So I'm perfectly open to the possibility that this film could be, yeah, a very superficial fan film, but hit its marks in a way that even somebody like me would possibly enjoy. So,
Hmm. You said you didn't really care much for Shin Godzilla. I'm curious to know why you feel that way.
mainly just because I found it very plotting, redundant, and it and just I don't know, like a movie that's mostly just people sitting around tables talking about more or less the same thing each time. It's not really my idea of a fun time of movies. Also, I'm not a huge fan of the movie that inspired Shin Godzilla. There's a film called Japan's Longest Day, which is a political thriller from the 60s, which is very clearly the model for Shin Godzilla in terms of how it's shot and whatnot. And I'm personally not a fan of that film, so that also may have a bearing on my lack of enthusiasm for Shin Godzilla. I don't despise Shin Godzilla by any means. I just have very mixed feelings about it, and there are things about it that I think are very very good. The big laser attack on the city is one of the best scenes of recent Godzilla films. I think the musical score is wonderful. And the acting and the directing is, yeah, I'm not really crazy about the style, but I can still recognize, yeah, sure, it's well done, even if it's not really like my kind of thing. And it's for the most part very well acted. So yeah, not a film that I'm really crazy about, but there are things about it that I do like. So, and also the movie is kind of interesting as a time capsule movie in terms of like the 311 stuff and the soft nationalistic elements of like the young bureaucrats who rise to the challenge and do what the old bureaucrats could not do. These kind of like soft nationalistic films are very much prevalent in modern day Japanese films that are very successful, like The Eternal Zero, which is a World War II kamikaze film, Fukushima 50, a dramatization of the meltdown, which came out 2 years ago, I think. Which I gotta tell you, when I saw that film, I thought to myself that it was basically a remake of Shin Godzilla, just without the monster, because it was like shot the same way, edited the same way, lit very much the same way. It has basically the same story. An incident happens in the first 30 seconds, and then people respond to it, and it's got a little more of the civilian perspective than Shin Godzilla, but it's still very much about the bureaucrats, the patriots, the soldiers who rise to the challenge to get things done, while the people upstairs kind of like fumble in the face of disaster. And as a movie made in that kind of zeitgeist, I think Shin Godzilla is also interesting on that historical level. So again, it's not a film that I'm really crazy about, but I will not pretend that there's not things about it that can be discussed in an interesting way as well.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not crazy about Shin Godzilla either. But I find that every time I watch it, there is something about it that I notice that, makes me like it even more,
Sure.
makes me appreciate it more. So yeah, I definitely see what you're saying there. So yeah. Before we wrap up our discussion, do you have any more passion projects on the horizon?
Well, at the moment, I just spent nights and weekends of the last 9 months working on this. So I
Mhm.
am taking what I think is a much deserved break from that kind of
Fair.
dedication, and just taking a little break to just like rejuvenate and relax and try to market this out to people who might be interested. So yeah, I think running you a story like even if you're not really fascinated by Chinese movies, it's an interesting story, I think, in terms of like how it reflected events happening in her nation at the time. And also it's like our friend Norman England, who described it as kind of like a woman's story. And women's rights in China are, I'm not saying this to be discriminatory, but it's just a historical fact. Women's rights in China and many parts of Asia have historically been behind the times. Unfortunately, it's an unfortunate reality, but it's just the way it is. And it was prevalent during her time as well. And so I think her story kind of reflects like how that was in her time, and as you get to the end of the book, how it's not too different from the way it is now. I'll just say this: there was a Hong Kong actress from of modern times who went through some very similar things that she did, and remarked how she identified with her and understood how she felt she could not face society at that point in her own life. So yeah, so I think it's a story. It's a story that would appeal to people who like Chinese films, who like Chinese history, who like social history, and who are interested in the plight of women, and who just like the story of people who work in the movie industry. Because I also tried to consciously talk about her industry and about how it was changing during China's big socio-political tumultuous events in the first couple of decades of the 20th century, and how that also affected, after she died, how that affected the people she worked with, her colleagues and directors and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of stories going on in this book, and that's why I hope people will find appealing about it.
All right. Well, once again, people, if you want to buy the book, link is down below in the description. Please support Patrick. He worked very hard on this book, and he very much deserves a break. So, all right. Thank you so much for coming on to the show, Patrick. It's been a pleasure.
No, thank you for having me. It was an honor to be here.
And to you watching at home, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to hang out with me and my fantastic guest. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Like this stream if you had a good time here tonight. And be sure to be back here next Sunday, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, for another edition of Chill with Kaiju Kim. Thanks for watching. See you next time.